The sunlight of a June afternoon beat down mercilessly on the exclusive neighborhood, casting harsh shadows beneath the manicured trees that lined the street. 7-year-old Lily Anderson stood beneath an ancient oak tree, her small shoulders drooping under the weight of her basket filled with handmade crafts. Her faded cotton dress hung loosely on her thin frame, a stark contrast to the opulent mansion behind her. The massive oak provided brief respite from the punishing heat as Lily gazed up at its sprawling canopy. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to live in such a grand home with its gleaming windows and ornate iron gates. A forbidden daydream for a child who had known nothing but struggle since her mother's death 3 years ago. The mansion's heavy wooden doors swung open suddenly and Richard Montgomery emerged, tall, imposing in his tailored suit, his face a mask of practiced authority. His eyes narrowed at the sight of the small intruder beneath his prized oak. "Young lady, this is private property," he called out sharply. "You can't sell your trinkets here." Lily's heart pounded as she scrambled to gather her things. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just resting." As she moved, the sunlight caught something around her neck, a silver pendant in the shape of a sunflower that had slipped from beneath her collar. Richard froze, his reprimand dying on his lips. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet as he stared at the necklace, recognition flooding his features. "Depend," and he whispered, his voice suddenly stripped of all authority. "Where did you get it?" His eyes, no longer cold but filled with a desperate kind of hope, locked onto the small piece of silver that gleamed in the sunlight, the very same pendant he had placed around Sarah Anderson's neck 7 years ago, the night before his family tore them apart forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The Montgomery estate stood as a monument to old money and careful curation, its sprawling grounds and colonial architecture speaking of generations of wealth accumulated and maintained. The ancient oak tree that had provided shade for Lily was just one of many landmarks on the 12-acre property that had been in the Montgomery family for over a century. Behind its imposing iron gates and manicured hedges lay a world entirely separate from the struggling neighborhoods just a few miles away where Lily and her aunt made their home. At 7 years old, Lily Anderson possessed a quiet dignity that children her age rarely exhibited. Her large brown eyes, identical to her mother's, observed the world with an intelligence that often unsettled adults who expected childish naivety. 3 years after her mother's death, Lily had learned to help her Aunt Jessica with their meager livelihood, selling handcrafted items and flowers on weekend. Despite their circumstances, Lily maintained an ethereal quality, a gentleness that Sarah had somehow managed to preserve in her daughter, even through their hardest time. The sunflower pendant that had captured Richard Montgomery's attention was Lily's most treasured possession. Each night before sleep, she would hold it in her small palm and whisper to it as though her mother might hear her words through the silver trinket. "Good night, Mama," she would say, before tucking it safely beneath her nightgown. The pendant was her anchor in a world that had proven unstable, the one constant she could rely on. Richard Montgomery at 35 had achieved everything society dictated a man of his standing should accomplish. His position as chief financial officer of Montgomery Industries, the family business his grandfather had founded, afforded him respect in Boston's business circles. His engagement to Catherine Williams, daughter of a Massachusetts senator, cemented his social standing. From the outside, Richard appeared the quintessential success story, handsome, wealthy, and soon to complete the perfect picture with an advantageous marriage. Yet behind his carefully constructed facade, Richard harbored a haunting regret. The dreams came nearly every night. Sarah standing in the rain, her face a portrait of betrayal as she waited for him outside their meeting place, the old oak tree. In his dreams, unlike in reality, he would sometimes rush to her, choosing love over family loyalty. Other times he would watch himself turn away again, condemning them both to their separate fates. 7 years had passed since he had acquiesced to his mother's demands and ended his relationship with the help, but time had done little to ease his conscience. Eleanor Montgomery had ruled the family with unwavering authority since her husband's death 15 years prior. At 68, she maintained the regal bearing and sharp mind that had intimidated Boston society for decades. Her silver hair was always perfectly coiffed, her designer clothes impeccable, her manner deliberately courteous but cool. Few people knew that behind the closed doors of her private greenhouse grew a garden of sunflowers, the same flower that adorned the pendant she had ordered her son to take back from that girl 7 years ago. Fewer still knew why she tended to them with such devotion, or why she sometimes stood among them and wept when she believed no one was watching. Lily's small hand clutched the pendant as Richard Montgomery's intense gaze fixed upon it. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken questions. Richard took a tentative step forward, his authoritative demeanor replaced by an unsettling vulnerability that made Lily instinctively back away. "Please," Richard said, his voice softening. "I'm not going to hurt you. That necklace, where did you get it?" Lily swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "It was my mother's," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "She gave it to me before she died." Richard's face paled visibly. "Your mother? What was her name?" Sarah Anderson," Lily replied, watching confusion transform into recognition in the man's eyes. The name hit Richard like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the oak tree. The same tree where he and Sarah had met in secret during those precious stolen moments 7 years ago. His mind raced with calculations and possibilities. This child before him, with those familiar, thoughtful eyes, could she possibly be— "And your father?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lily looked down at her worn shoes. "I don't have one. Aunt Jessica says he died before I was born." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Richard's world was tilting on its axis, years of carefully constructed equilibrium threatening to shatter. If Sarah had been pregnant when his mother forced her to leave, if this child was indeed his daughter— "Where do you live, Lily? Is your Aunt Jessica at home now?" Richard asked, making a decision even as the words left his mouth. "In Somerville. She works at Memorial Hospital until 4, Lily answered cautiously, her survival instincts warning her about revealing too much to this stranger, despite his apparent interest in her mother's necklace. Richard reached into his wallet and handed Lily his business card. "Please give this to your aunt. Tell her Richard Montgomery would like to speak with her about Sarah. It's very important." Lily accepted the card hesitantly, studying the embossed lettering before carefully tucking it into the pocket of her dress. She had heard her mother mention this name in hushed conversations with Aunt Jessica years ago, though she couldn't recall the context. The unexpected connection made her curious, despite her wariness. "I should go now," Lily said, adjusting her basket of handmade trinkets. "Aunt Jessica will worry if I'm late." Richard nodded, reluctant to let her leave, but aware that detaining someone else's child would raise alarming questions. "Of course, but please make sure she gets my card." As Lily walked away from the Montgomery estate, Richard remained beneath the oak tree, watching her small figure recede into the distance. The possibility that had taken root in his mind was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Could fate have brought his child, a child he never knew existed, directly to his doorstep? Jessica Anderson was hanging her nurse's uniform to dry in the small bathroom of their apartment when she heard Lily's key in the door. The one-bedroom apartment they shared in Somerville was clean but cramped, with pull-out furniture that transformed the living room into Lily's bedroom each night. Jessica had taken the early shift at the hospital today, allowing her to be home when Lily returned from selling their handcrafts. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Jessica called out, emerging from the bathroom with a tired smile. "Did you sell any of the lavender sachets?" Lily placed her basket on their small kitchen table, now half empty. "I sold 4 sachets and 3 of the beaded bracelets," she reported proudly, counting out $37. "And Mrs. Finley from the bakery gave me these day-old cookies for free." Jessica's smile widened as she examined the slightly stale but still appetizing chocolate chip cookies. "That was kind of her. We'll have these with milk for dessert tonight." Lily hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "Aunt Jess, someone gave me this. He said he knew Mom." Jessica's fingers froze in the act of arranging cookies on a plate as Lily handed her the business card. "Richard Montgomery, Chief Financial Officer, Montgomery Industries." The name struck Jessica like a physical blow, and she had to steady herself against the kitchen counter. "Where did you meet this man?" Jessica asked, fighting to keep her voice neutral while alarm bells rang in her head. "At the big house with the oak tree. He saw Mom's necklace and got really strange," Lily explained, unconsciously touching the sunflower pendant beneath her collar. "He wants to talk to you about Mom. Is he a bad person, Aunt Jess?" Jessica sank into a kitchen chair, memories she had long suppressed rushing back. Sarah crying for weeks after being dismissed from the Montgomery household. Sarah refusing to name the father of her unborn child, insisting only that he had his reasons for not standing by her. Sarah making Jessica promise never to seek him out, even if something happened to her. "He's not a bad person, exactly," Jessica answered carefully. "He knew your mother a long time ago when she worked for his family." Lily's eyes widened with curiosity. "Was he her friend?" "Something like that," Jessica replied evasively, studying the business card again. After all these years, why would Richard Montgomery suddenly want to speak with her? Unless he had recognized the pendant and realized what it might mean. Jessica's hand trembled slightly as she set the card down. She had sworn to protect Lily, to honor Sarah's wishes, but she also knew her time was limited. The cancer diagnosis hung over her like a shadow, shortening her horizon with each passing day. What would happen to Lily when she was gone? The question haunted her sleepless nights. "Will you call him?" Lily asked, watching her aunt's face intently. Jessica looked at her niece, at Sarah's eyes looking back at her from Sarah's face, and made her decision. "Yes, I think I will." The following afternoon found Jessica sitting stiffly in the immaculate visitors area of Montgomery Industries' downtown Boston headquarters. The leather chair she occupied probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. She clutched her worn purse in her lap, feeling acutely out of place among the sleek, expensive furnishing. "Ms. Anderson?" The receptionist's polished voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mr. Montgomery will see you now." Jessica followed the young woman down a corridor lined with portraits of past Montgomery patriarchs, their stern faces seeming to judge her presumption in entering their domain. At the end of the hall, Richard Montgomery stood waiting in the doorway of a spacious corner office. She recognized him immediately, though it had been years since she had glimpsed him briefly during her sister's employment at the Montgomery estate. He had aged well, his dark hair now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, his bearing still confident, but with a weariness around the eyes that hadn't been there before. "Miss Anderson, thank you for coming," Richard said, gesturing her into his office and closing the door behind them. "Please, have a seat." Jessica remained standing. "I am here because you approached my niece yesterday. I want to know why." Richard studied her for a moment, noting the protective stance and the wariness in her expression. "I apologize if I alarmed Lily. That wasn't my intention." He moved to sit behind his desk, hoping the familiar territory would steady his nerves. "She was wearing a pendant, a silver sunflower. I recognized it because I gave it to your sister 7 years ago." "And now you've suddenly developed an interest in Sarah's daughter?" Jessica's voice carried a bitter edge. "After all this time?" "I didn't know," Richard said simply, his voice low with emotion. "I had no idea Sarah was pregnant when she left. Is Lily—" He couldn't bring himself to complete the question. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sarah never told me who Lily's father was. She made me promise never to look for him. But you have your suspicions, Richard pressed, leaning forward over his desk. What do you want, Mr. Montgomery? Jessica countered, finally taking a seat but perching on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. You're engaged to a senator's daughter, according to the society pages. You have a comfortable life. What possible interest could you have in my niece now? Richard's expression tightened at the mention of his engagement. If Lily is my daughter, I have a right to know her, and she has a right to know me. Rights? Jessica gave a humorless laugh. Where were these rights when your family threw Sarah out like garbage? Where were your rights when she struggled through pregnancy alone? When she worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over Lily's head? When she... Jessica's voice broke, and she had to look away to compose herself. Richard's face reflected genuine anguish. I didn't know, he repeated. My mother... She told me Sarah had found another position, that she'd left voluntarily. By the time I learned differently, weeks had passed, and I couldn't find her. Did you look very hard? Jessica asked pointedly. The question hung between them like an accusation. Richard had no adequate answer. He had searched, but not as thoroughly as he might have, afraid of what his mother would do if he persisted, afraid of the scandal that would follow if his relationship with the help became known. In the end, he had convinced himself that Sarah was better off without the complications he would bring to her life. It had been easier that way, for him, if not for her. I want to make this right, Richard said finally. I'm asking for a DNA test. If Lily is my daughter, I want to be part of her life. I can provide for her in ways... We don't need your money, Jessica interrupted sharply. Lily and I are managing fine. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Jessica's modest income barely covered their expenses, especially with her medical bills mounting. But pride ran deep in the Anderson family, as Sarah had demonstrated years before. Richard chose his next words carefully. This isn't just about financial support. If Lily is my daughter, she deserves to know her father. And I deserve the chance to know her. Jessica's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of her secret diagnosis pressing down on her. What would happen to Lily when she was gone? Child Services would step in, place her with strangers. If Richard was Lily's father and genuinely wanted to be in her life... Sarah would hate this, Jessica murmured, more to herself than to Richard. Maybe, Richard acknowledged. Or maybe she would understand that circumstances have changed. Jessica looked up, meeting his gaze directly. I'll agree to the DNA test on one condition. You don't tell Lily anything until we have the results and have discussed how to proceed. She's been through enough loss in her life. I won't have her hopes raised and then dashed if this turns out to be nothing. Richard nodded solemnly. You have my word. As Jessica left Montgomery Industries that afternoon, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just set in motion events that would irrevocably change Lily's life. For better or worse remained to be seen. The envelope lay unopened on Jessica's worn kitchen table, its crisp white surface stark against the faded tablecloth. Richard Montgomery sat across from her, his tailored suit incongruous in the modest apartment. Neither had reached for the DNA results since his arrival 10 minutes earlier. Before we open this, Jessica said, breaking the tense silence, there's something you should know about Sarah. She drew a deep breath, steeling herself. Sarah wasn't just some random housekeeper who caught your eye. She came to work for your family with a purpose. Richard frowned. What do you mean? Your family's longtime butler, George Williams, the one who worked for your parents for nearly 30 years before suddenly being dismissed, was our father. Richard's expression shifted from confusion to shock. George was your father? But that's impossible. My mother always said he retired and moved to Florida. That's what she wanted everyone to believe, Jessica replied, her voice bitter. In reality, she fired him without reference when he became ill after 3 decades of loyal service. He died 6 months later with no pension, no health care. Sarah took the housekeeping position to find out why he'd been treated so cruelly. Richard sat back, visibly stunned. I had no idea. I was away at college when George left. When I came home, Mother simply said he'd retired. Sarah didn't plan on falling in love with you, Jessica continued. That complicated everything. When she realized she was pregnant after being dismissed, she was determined to raise the child on her own, away from the Montgomery influence. She made me promise never to tell your family about Lily, even if something happened to her. Understanding dawned on Richard's face. So that day, when I found her playing the piano, wasn't the first time she'd been in your house. As children, we'd sometimes accompany our father to work when our mother had hospital shifts. Sarah knew every corner of that mansion before she ever applied for the job. Richard ran a hand through his hair, processing this revelation. Why are you telling me this now? Jessica's gaze fell to the envelope. Because if that test confirms what we both suspect, you need to understand that this isn't as simple as you swooping in to claim your daughter. There's history here. Painful history. Richard nodded slowly. I understand, and for what it's worth, I'm truly sorry about your father. I didn't know. With trembling fingers, Jessica finally reached for the envelope. She broke the seal and removed the single sheet inside, her eyes scanning the clinical language until she found the conclusion. The alleged father, Richard Montgomery, is not excluded as the biological father of the tested child, Lily Anderson. Based on the genetic testing results, the probability of paternity is 99%. She wordlessly passed the paper to Richard, watching as he read the confirmation of what they'd both suspected. His face displayed a complex mixture of emotions: shock, joy, grief, and something that looked remarkably like fear. She's my daughter, he whispered, the words half statement, half question. Yes, Jessica confirmed simply. Richard set the paper down carefully, as if it might shatter. I want to be part of her life, Jessica. I've missed 7 years already. And what about your fiancée? Your mother, your perfect society life, Jessica challenged. Are you prepared to explain Lily to them? Because I won't let you acknowledge her when it's convenient and hide her when it's not. Richard's jaw tightened. Catherine needs to know. As for my mother, he paused, his expression hardening. Eleanor Montgomery doesn't dictate my life anymore. I lost Sarah because I allowed that once. I won't lose my daughter, too. Jessica studied him skeptically. Pretty words, but will they translate to action when your mother threatens to cut you off, when your fiancé gives you an ultimatum, when your business associates whisper behind your back about your illegitimate child? I'm not the same man I was 7 years ago, Richard insisted. I've spent every day regretting that I didn't fight for Sarah. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an earnest pitch. Please, Jessica, give me a chance to know my daughter. Before Jessica could respond, the apartment door opened and Lily entered with Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who had been watching her. Aunt Jess, Mrs. Peterson showed me how to make real pie crust, Lily announced excitedly before noticing the visitor. She stopped short, her expression growing cautious. Hello, Mr. Montgomery. Richard stood, suddenly awkward in the presence of the child he now knew to be his daughter. Hello, Lily. You can call me Richard if you'd like. Jessica quickly gathered the papers and tucked them into the envelope. Thank you for bringing her home, Mrs. Peterson, she said, ushering the older woman to the door with quiet thanks. When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence fell over the apartment. Lily looked questioningly at her aunt. Why is he here? She asked finally, her direct gaze so reminiscent of Sarah that Richard felt his chest tighten. Jessica exchanged a glance with Richard before answering carefully. Richard and I were discussing some things about your mother. Adult things. Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. Is it about my necklace? You seemed upset when you saw it, she said, addressing Richard directly. Richard cleared his throat. Yes, partly. I recognized it because I gave it to your mother a long time ago. We were friends. "Were you her boyfriend?" Lily asked with the disarming directness of childhood. Richard blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Yes," he admitted after a moment. "For a while, I was." Lily considered this new information solemnly. "Did you love her?" Jessica intervened. "Lily, that's enough questions for now. Why don't you go change out of your school clothes while I finish talking with Richard?" Once Lily had disappeared into the bathroom, Jessica turned to Richard. "This is happening too fast. She needs time to process who you are before we tell her everything." Richard nodded, though the urge to blurt out the truth was nearly overwhelming. "How do we proceed?" "Slowly," Jessica emphasized. "Start by spending time with her as a friend who knew her mother. Let her get comfortable with you before we explain that you're her father." "And how much time are we talking about?" Richard pressed. Jessica sighed, unconsciously touching her side where the pain from her cancer had been increasing lately. "A few weeks, maybe a month. Children need stability, Richard. Lily's whole world has already been upended once when Sarah died. I won't let it happen again with some hasty revelation." Richard reluctantly agreed, though his expression betrayed his impatience. "I'd like to start this weekend, if possible. Perhaps I could take her to the Children's Museum or the aquarium." Jessica considered the request. "The aquarium would be good. She loves marine life. But I'll be coming too, at least this first time." "Of course," Richard agreed quickly, relief evident in his voice that Jessica wasn't shutting him out completely. As Richard prepared to leave, Lily emerged from the bathroom, now dressed in leggings and a faded T-shirt. She regarded him with open curiosity. "Will you be coming back?" she asked. Richard smiled, his first genuine smile since receiving the test results. "Yes, I will. In fact, your aunt and I were just discussing a trip to the aquarium this weekend. Would you like that?" Lily's expression brightened. "Really? I love the penguins." "Then it's settled," Richard said, glancing at Jessica for confirmation. "I'll pick you both up Saturday morning." After Richard left, Lily bombarded Jessica with questions about him, about his connection to her mother, about why he had suddenly appeared in their lives. Jessica answered as honestly as she could without revealing the full truth, promising herself that she would find the right moment to help Lily understand the complicated reality of her parentage. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the pull-out sofa, Jessica sat alone at the kitchen table, Sarah's photograph before her. "I hope you'd understand," she whispered to her sister's image. "He seems sincere, and I need to know she'll be taken care of when I'm gone." She brushed away a tear. "But I swear I'll make sure he proves himself worthy of her before I tell her the truth." Richard returned to his penthouse that evening to find Catherine Williams, his fiancée, waiting for him. Her elegant figure was silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Boston Harbor, a glass of red wine in her manicured hand. "You missed the cake tasting," she said without turning. "The caterer was quite put out." Richard inwardly cursed. With the DNA test results and his meeting with Jessica, he'd completely forgotten about the wedding preparation appointment. "I'm sorry, Katie. Something came up at work that couldn't wait," he lied, despising himself for the ease with which the falsehood came. Catherine turned now, her beautiful features arranged in a practiced expression of understanding that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, darling. The Montgomery Empire waits for no man, not even its prince." She approached, kissing him lightly. "I rescheduled for next Tuesday. I've marked your calendar and asked Marion to block the time." Richard nodded, accepting the glass of wine she offered him. He watched her move about his kitchen with the confidence of someone who already considered the space partially hers, though they wouldn't be living together until after their wedding in 4 months. Catherine Williams was the perfect match on paper. Daughter of Senator William Williams, she had her own successful career as an art gallery owner, impeccable social credentials, and the kind of polished beauty that photographed well for society pages. Their engagement had been celebrated as the union of two of Boston's most prestigious families. And now, less than 4 months before their wedding, Richard had discovered he had a 7-year-old daughter with a woman his family had cast out. "You seem distracted," Catherine observed, her keen eyes studying him over the rim of her wine-glass. "Is everything all right with the Stevens acquisition?" "Everything's fine," Richard assured her, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." The New England Aquarium bustled with weekend visitors as Richard waited near the ticket counter, nervously checking his watch every few minutes. He had arrived 20 minutes early, unable to contain his anticipation about spending time with Lily. He had purchased 3 tickets in advance, one for himself, one for Lily, and one for Jessica, who had insisted on accompanying them on this first outing. Richard had spent a restless night after his decision to tell Catherine about Lily. The conversation had gone exactly as poorly as he had feared. Catherine's initial disbelief had quickly transformed into cold fury when she realized he wasn't joking. "A child? With a housekeeper?" she had repeated, her voice rising with each word. "And you're just discovering this now? How convenient, Richard, 4 months before our wedding." He had tried to explain, to make her understand the complexity of the situation, but Catherine had been unmoved. "I need time to think," she had said finally, slipping her engagement ring off and placing it deliberately on his coffee table. "Don't call me until I contact you." Now, as family streamed past him into the aquarium, Richard found himself oddly relieved. Catherine's reaction, while painful, had clarified his priorities. If she couldn't accept Lily, then perhaps they had no future together after all. "Richard!" A small voice pulled him from his thoughts. Lily approached, her hand firmly clasped in Jessica's, her face animated with excitement. She wore a blue dress with white sandals, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The sunflower pendant gleamed at her throat. "You're here early," Jessica observed, her expression guarded despite her agreement to this outing. Richard smiled, trying to mask his nervousness. "I wanted to make sure we could get tickets, but then I remembered you can buy them online now." He knelt to Lily's level. "Are you ready to see some amazing sea creatures?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I read a book about octopuses. Did you know they have 3 hearts and blue blood and can change colors?" Richard's smile widened at her enthusiasm. "I didn't know that." "You'll have to tell me more about them when we see them." As they entered the aquarium, Richard felt a strange mixture of joy and sorrow. Joy at finally spending time with his daughter, sorrow at all the years he had missed, all the facts she had learned, all the interests she had developed, all the milestones he had not witnessed. Lily proved to be a knowledgeable guide, reciting facts about various marine animals as they moved through the exhibits. Jessica remained watchful but gradually relaxed as she observed the natural rapport developing between Richard and Lily. At the penguin exhibit, Lily pressed her face against the glass, entranced by the birds' underwater acrobatics. "They look like they're flying under the water," she said dreamily. "They do, don't they?" Richard agreed, standing beside her. "When I was about your age, my father brought me here to see the penguins. It was my favorite part, too." Lily glanced up at him curiously. "What was your dad like?" The innocent question caught Richard off guard. "He was complicated," he answered carefully. "Very focused on business, not always good at showing affection, but I think he loved me in his own way. My mom used to tell me stories about my dad," Lily said, returning her gaze to the penguins. "She said he was smart and kind, and that he would have loved me very much if he'd known me." Richard's throat tightened with emotion. He looked over Lily's head at Jessica, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Not yet." "Your mother was very wise," Richard managed, his voice rough with suppressed feeling. They continued through the aquarium, stopping for lunch at the cafe overlooking the harbor. As Lily happily consumed her grilled cheese sandwich, Jessica excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Richard alone with his daughter for the first time. "Are you enjoying the aquarium?" he asked, searching for safe conversation. Lily nodded, swallowing a bite of sandwich. "It's the best day I've had in forever." She hesitated, then asked, "Why did you want to take me here?" Richard was momentarily taken aback by her directness. "Because I thought you'd enjoy it," he answered honestly. "And because I wanted to get to know you better." "Because you knew my mom?" Lily pressed. "Yes," Richard acknowledged. "And because I care about what happens to you." Lily studied him with that unnervingly perceptive gaze she had inherited from Sarah. "Aunt Jessica is sick, isn't she?" she asked quietly. "I heard her throwing up in the bathroom last night. She thinks I was asleep, but I wasn't." Richard froze, unsure how to respond. Jessica hadn't mentioned any illness to him. "I don't know," he said carefully. "Have you asked her about it?" Lily shook her head. "She'll just say it's nothing, like she always does when something's wrong. But I'm not a baby. I know when grown-ups are keeping secrets." Before Richard could formulate a response, Jessica returned, looking pale but composed. She slid back into her seat with a forced smile. "Sorry about that. Work needed to confirm my shift for Monday." The remainder of their aquarium visit passed pleasantly, though Richard found himself watching Jessica more closely, noting the occasional wince she tried to hide, the way she subtly pressed her hand against her side when she thought no one was looking. By the time they exited the building into the late afternoon sunlight, he was certain something was seriously wrong. "There's an ice cream shop around the corner," Richard suggested, noticing Lily's wistful glance at a family enjoying cones as they passed. "Would you like some before heading home?" Lily looked to Jessica for permission, who nodded with a tired smile. "Ice cream sounds perfect." At the shop, Richard volunteered to order while Jessica and Lily secured a table outside. When he returned with their treats, chocolate for Lily, coffee for Jessica, vanilla for himself, he found Lily chattering excitedly about the sea turtles they had seen. "Aunt Jessica, can we get a pet turtle?" she was asking as Richard set down the ice cream. Jessica laughed, the sound strained to Richard's now attentive ears. "I think Mrs. Peterson might object to a turtle in the apartment, sweetheart. Remember how she felt about the goldfish?" Lily sighed dramatically. "She said it would stink up the whole building if it died, but turtles live for like 100 years. As Lily enthusiastically consumed her ice cream, Richard leaned closer to Jessica. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked quietly. "You seem unwell." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. "I'm fine, just tired." "Lily mentioned hearing you being sick last night," Richard pressed, keeping his voice low. Jessica paled, then quickly composed herself. "It's nothing serious," she insisted, though something in her eyes told a different story. "Just a stomach bug. It's been going around." Richard was unconvinced, but decided not to push further in Lily's presence. They finished their ice cream, and Richard insisted on calling his driver to take Jessica and Lily home, rather than having them take public transportation. "That's really not necessary," Jessica protested. "Please," Richard said. "It would make me feel better." In the end, Jessica relented, her exhaustion evident as she sank into the leather seat of the luxury sedan that arrived to collect them. Lily bounced excitedly beside her, clearly delighted by the upscaled vehicle. "Does your car have a TV in it?" she asked Richard, wide-eyed at the amenities. Richard laughed. "Not this one, but my other car does." "You have two cars?" Lily marveled, making both adults smile despite the undercurrent of tension. At the apartment building, Richard walked them to their door, increasingly concerned by Jessica's pallor and the slight tremor in her hands as she searched for her keys. "Thank you for today," Jessica said formally as they reached the apartment. "Lily had a wonderful time." "I did too," Richard replied sincerely. "Perhaps we could do something again next weekend. The Museum of Science has a new dinosaur exhibit that might interest Lily." Before Jessica could respond, Lily piped up enthusiastically, "Can we, Aunt Jess? Please?" Jessica hesitated, then nodded. "We'll see. It depends on my work schedule." Richard knelt to Lily's level. "Thank you for teaching me about octopuses and sea turtles today. I learned a lot." Lily beamed at him. "You're welcome. Next time I can tell you about sharks. They're even cooler." After Lily had gone inside, Richard touched Jessica's arm gently. "Jessica, if you're ill, please let me help, whatever is going on." "I said I'm fine," Jessica interrupted, her voice tight. Then, seeing his genuine concern, her expression softened slightly. "But thank you for today. It meant a lot to Lily." Richard watched them disappear into the apartment, his mind troubled. Something was definitely wrong with Jessica, something more serious than she was admitting, and her condition could have significant implications for Lily's future, for their plans to gradually introduce him as her father. Returning to his car, Richard made a decision. He would respect Jessica's privacy for now, but he would also accelerate his preparations to become a permanent part of Lily's life. He needed to confront his mother, finalize things with Catherine one way or another, and secure his legal position regarding Lily's custody, just in case Jessica's health was more precarious than she was letting on. Eleanor Montgomery's sprawling Beacon Hill mansion had been in the family for 4 generations. Its stately facade and meticulously maintained gardens projected exactly the image of old Boston money that Eleanor had cultivated throughout her life. As Richard approached the imposing front door the following day, he felt the familiar mixture of respect and resentment that the house always evoked in him. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, admitted him with a formal nod. "Your mother is in the conservatory, Mr. Montgomery. She's expecting you." Of course she was. Eleanor's network of informants throughout Boston society would have already alerted her to Catherine's dramatic exit from his apartment, if not to the specific reason for it. Richard found his mother among her prized orchids, elegant as always in a tailored pantsuit despite it being Sunday. At 68, Eleanor Montgomery remained a formidable presence, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, her posture impeccable as she carefully misted a delicate bloom. "Richard," she greeted him without turning, "I was wondering when you would visit. Catherine's mother called me in quite a state yesterday." Richard steeled himself. "Then you know why I'm here." Eleanor set down her mister and finally faced him, her expression unreadable. "I know that you've apparently fathered a child with a former member of our household staff, and that you chose to reveal this information to your fiancé 4 months before your wedding. What I don't know is what you expect me to do about it." "I don't expect you to do anything, Mother," Richard replied evenly. "I'm here to inform you, not to ask permission." Eleanor arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Inform me of what, precisely?" "That I have a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, that her mother was Sarah Anderson, who worked here as a housekeeper 7 years ago, the same Sarah you had dismissed when you discovered our relationship, that I intend to acknowledge Lily publicly as my child and to be part of her life moving forward." Eleanor's composure didn't waver, but Richard knew her well enough to see the tension in her jaw, the slight narrowing of her eyes. "I see. And what does this mean for your engagement to Catherine?" "That's between Catherine and me," Richard said firmly. "But if she can't accept my daughter, then there won't be a wedding." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor snapped, her cool facade cracking slightly. "Catherine Williams is the perfect match for you, for this family. You won't throw away years of planning for some child who's managed to appear at a suspiciously convenient moment." Richard felt his temper rising, but forced himself to remain calm. "Lily isn't some child, Mother. She's my daughter. And there's no convenience to her timing. I only discovered her existence by chance when she happened to be wearing a pendant I gave Sarah years ago." Eleanor turned away, moving deeper into the conservatory. Richard followed, noting that she was heading toward the back section, an area she typically kept private from visitors. As they rounded a corner, he stopped short in surprise. Before him spread a sea of sunflowers, dozens of them in various stages of bloom, their bright yellow faces turned toward the glass ceiling. It was as if a piece of summer field had been transplanted into the formal conservatory, wildly out of place among the carefully cultivated exotic specimens his mother preferred. "Mother," Richard said slowly, "what is this?" Eleanor didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the golden blooms. "Helianthus annuus," she said clinically. "Common sunflowers, hardly remarkable." But they were remarkable. Their presence here, in Eleanor Montgomery's carefully controlled domain, was extraordinary. Richard remembered Sarah's love of sunflowers, how she had exclaimed with delight when he had given her the pendant, telling him they had always been her favorite because they turned their faces to the light even on the darkest days. "Why, sunflowers, Mother," he pressed. "You've never grown them before." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she touched one of the bright petals. "You're mistaken. I've grown them for years, just not where visitors would see them." She paused, then added almost unwillingly, "Your father always considered them common." A memory surfaced in Richard's mind, his mother, much younger, wearing a sunflower mapper dress at a summer picnic, laughing as his father teased her about her country girl taste. It was one of the few times he remembered seeing his parents genuinely happy together. "You knew, didn't you?" Richard realized suddenly. "When you saw Sarah wearing the pendant I gave her, you recognized it as a sunflower. That's why you were so adamant about dismissing her." Eleanor's silence was confirmation enough. "Did you know she was George's daughter?" Richard pressed, watching his mother's shoulders stiffen at the question. "Did you know our loyal butler for 30 years was Jessica and Sarah's father?" Eleanor turned to face him, her expression carefully controlled once more. "Of course I knew. Why do you think I insisted on her dismissal? She didn't come here to dust the furniture, Richard. She came with an agenda." "An agenda?" Richard repeated incredulously. "To find out why her father had been cast aside after 30 years of service? Can you blame her?" "George Williams was dismissed because he was stealing from this family," Eleanor stated coldly. "Expensive items began disappearing, jewelry, silver, small antiques. When confronted, he denied everything, but the evidence was clear." Richard shook his head in disbelief. "George? The man who refused tips at Christmas because he considered service to this family payment enough? I don't believe it." "Believe what you want," Eleanor said dismissively. "The fact remains that Sarah Anderson came into this house under false pretenses, seduced my son, and now her child has appeared to claim the Montgomery name and fortune." "Sarah didn't seduce me," Richard countered, his voice rising. "We fell in love. And Lily isn't claiming anything. Until a few days ago, she didn't even know I existed." Eleanor moved to a small writing desk nestled among the plants, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a file. "Perhaps you should see this before you throw away your future on sentimentality." She handed him the folder with an air of finality. Richard opened it to find photographs. Surveillance photos of Sarah entering an apartment building, speaking with another man, walking with him in a park. The images were grainy but clear enough to identify her. "Well, what is this?" he demanded. "Evidence that your precious Sarah was not as devoted to you as you believed," Eleanor replied coolly. "That man is David Mercer. He was seeing Sarah during the same period she was involved with you." Richard stared at the photos, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. "That doesn't prove anything. He could have been a friend, a relative." "He was her fiancé," Eleanor stated flatly. "They had been engaged before she came to work here. I had these taken after I began to suspect her intentions toward you. She was playing you, Richard, using you to extract revenge, or money, or both, for her father's dismissal." Richard closed the file, pushing it back toward his mother. "Even if that were true, which I don't believe for a moment, it doesn't change the fact that Lily is my daughter. DNA doesn't lie, Mother. whatever Sarah's intentions might or might not have been. Eleanor's expression hardened. If you persist in acknowledging this child publicly, if you break your engagement to Catherine over this, you will no longer be welcome in this house. The position at Montgomery Industries that has been waiting for you to assume full leadership will go to someone else. Perhaps James would be willing to step up after all. Everything we built, everything we've planned for your future will be forfeit. The threat hung in the air between them. Richard looked around at the sunflowers, at his mother's rigid posture, at the file of surveillance photos on the desk. Suddenly, with perfect clarity, he understood what he needed to do. "Goodbye, Mother," he said quietly. Eleanor's eyes widened fractionally. She had not expected him to choose so decisively. "Richard, don't be hasty. Take some time to consider." "I've had 7 years to consider my priorities," Richard interrupted. 7 years of regret for not standing by Sarah when she needed me. I won't make the same mistake with Lily. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, her voice holding a note he'd rarely heard from her. Something almost like desperation. "Richard, wait. There's more you don't understand." But Richard had already made his choice. He walked out of the conservatory, out of the mansion, out of the life that had been prescribed for him since birth. The weight of expectations he had carried for 35 years seemed to lift with each step away from his mother's domain. In his car, Richard sat for a long moment, processing what had just occurred. He had effectively been disinherited. His mother would be as good as her word. By tomorrow, his position at Montgomery Industries would be tenuous at best. His social standing in Boston society irrevocably damaged. Catherine would likely make their separation official, and the wedding would be canceled amid whispers and speculation. And yet, as he started the engine, Richard felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time in his adult life, he had made a choice based not on what was expected of him, but on what he knew to be right. He pulled out his phone and dialed Jessica's number. "It's Richard," he said when she answered. "I'd like to visit tomorrow if that's convenient. There are some things we need to discuss about Lily's future." The Children's Museum of Boston hummed with the excited voices of children exploring exhibits on a Saturday morning. Richard watched as Lily darted between displays in the dinosaur hall, her face alight with wonder. 2 weeks had passed since their first outing to the aquarium, and in that time, Richard had managed to see Lily 5 more times. For ice cream after school, for a walk in the park, for dinner at a child-friendly restaurant, and now for this museum visit. Each encounter strengthened the bond between them, though Lily still knew him only as a friend who had known her mother. "Did you know that Tyrannosaurus Rex had teeth as big as bananas?" Lily informed him, pointing to a massive skull display. Richard crouched beside her, admiring the fearsome teeth. "I didn't know that. That's pretty impressive. Aunt Jessica read me a whole book about dinosaurs," Lily continued. "She says I'm a natural scientist because I ask so many questions." At the mention of Jessica, Richard glanced toward the museum cafe where she sat waiting for them. She had begged off the dinosaur exhibit, claiming fatigue, but Richard suspected it was more than that. Jessica's condition had visibly deteriorated over the past 2 weeks, her face more gaunt, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes, her movements increasingly careful, as though any sudden motion might cause pain. "Your aunt is very smart to recognize what a good scientist you are," Richard said, returning his attention to Lily. "What other kinds of science do you like?" Lily considered the question seriously. "I like space and animals and chemistry. Aunt Jessica got me a chemistry set for my birthday, but we had to put it away because Mrs. Peterson said it might explode." Richard laughed. "Well, the best scientists know when to be careful. Maybe we could set up your experiment somewhere else sometime." Lily's eyes widened. "Like at your house? Do you have a laboratory?" The innocent question caught Richard off guard. Though he had spent considerable time with Lily over the past 2 weeks, she had never been to his home. In fact, since his confrontation with Eleanor, Richard had moved out of his downtown penthouse and into a more modest but still spacious townhouse in Cambridge, closer to Lily and Jessica's neighborhood. "I don't have a laboratory," he admitted, "but I do have a spare room that could be set up for experiments. Would you like to come over sometime?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, then her expression grew more serious. "Would it be okay with Aunt Jessica, though? She's been really tired lately." Richard's heart ached at the perceptiveness of this 7-year-old who was clearly aware that something was wrong with her aunt. "We'll ask her, but I'm sure she wouldn't mind. In fact, she might appreciate having some time to rest while you and I have our science adventures." After completing their tour of the dinosaur exhibit, they rejoined Jessica in the cafe. Richard noted with concern that she had barely touched her tea, and her hand trembled slightly as she raised the cup to her lips. "Did you two enjoy the dinosaurs?" she asked, smiling at Lily's excitement. "They were awesome. Richard didn't even know that T-Rex teeth were as big as bananas," Lily reported, climbing into the chair beside her aunt. "Is that so?" Jessica raised an eyebrow at Richard. "I thought everyone knew that." Richard grinned at the gentle teasing. "Apparently my dinosaur education was sorely lacking. Thankfully, I have an excellent teacher now." He winked at Lily, who beamed with pride. As Lily happily consumed a cupcake from the cafe, Richard leaned closer to Jessica. "You're not well," he said quietly. "This is more than fatigue or a stomach bug. Please, Jessica, let me help." Jessica's smile faded. She glanced at Lily to ensure the child was absorbed in her treat before responding in an equally low voice. "There's nothing you can do." "At least tell me what we're dealing with," Richard pressed, "for Lily's sake, if not your own." Jessica met his gaze, and for the first time, Richard saw the fear she had been hiding. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," she whispered. "I found out 3 months ago. The prognosis isn't good." Though Richard had suspected something serious, the confirmation still hit him like a physical blow. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Originally 6 months, so maybe 3 more, if I'm lucky." Jessica looked away, blinking rapidly. "I haven't told Lily yet. I don't know how." Richard reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out together, but Jessica, we need to tell her about me soon. She needs to know she has a father before—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Jessica nodded in understanding. "I know. I've been thinking about that too. I just wanted to be sure you were going to stick around, that this wasn't some novelty that would wear off." "I'm not going anywhere," Richard assured her firmly. "In fact, I've already consulted with a family lawyer about establishing legal paternity. I want to do this right, Jessica." Jessica studied him for a long moment, then nodded again. "Okay, let's tell her tomorrow. Sunday morning. We can do it at your place, if you're willing. It might be good for her to see where you live, to start getting comfortable there." Richard felt a surge of both relief and anxiety. Tomorrow it is. As they were preparing to leave the museum, Richard's phone vibrated with an incoming call. He checked the display and frowned. It was James, his brother, who had been conspicuously silent since Richard's confrontation with their mother. "I need to take this." Richard excused himself, stepping a few paces away. "James? What is it?" "Little brother," James's smooth voice came through the line. "Mother told me about your situation. I thought I should reach out, see how you're doing." Richard's guard immediately went up. James had never been one for fraternal concern unless he had an angle. "I'm fine. Is that all?" "So cold," James chided. "Can't a brother express genuine interest in your welfare, especially given your recent changes? I hear you've moved, quit the firm, broken your engagement. That's quite a life overhaul in just 2 weeks. "What do you want, James?" Richard asked bluntly, keeping an eye on Lily and Jessica as they browsed the gift shop. "I want to meet her," James said simply. "My niece?" If she's going to be part of the Montgomery family, surely I have a right to know her." Richard hesitated. James had never shown much interest in children before, not even their numerous cousins. "That's premature. She doesn't even know I'm her father yet. We're telling her tomorrow." "Perfect timing, then," James persisted. "I could join you for dinner afterward, a little family celebration." "No," Richard said firmly. "This is going to be a lot for Lily to process. She needs time to adjust before meeting extended family." James was silent for a moment. "Mother is furious, you know. She's already had the lawyers revise her will, and the board is questioning your commitment to Montgomery Industries since you've barely been to the office." "I expected as much," Richard replied, unsurprised by Eleanor's swift retribution. "I made my choice." "Yes, you did," James agreed, his tone unreadable. "Well, when you're ready to introduce your daughter to her uncle, you know where to find me." After ending the call, Richard rejoined Jessica and Lily, his mind troubled by the conversation. James's sudden interest in Lily felt off somehow, though Richard couldn't put his finger on why. His brother had always been difficult to read, operating behind a facade of cordial detachment. "Everything okay?" Jessica asked, noting his expression. "Fine," Richard assured her, forcing a smile. "Just some family business. Are we ready to go?" As they left the museum, Richard couldn't shake the sense that James's call marked the beginning of something, a new phase in the already complicated situation. His brother rarely involved himself in family matters unless there was something to gain. The question was, what did James think he could gain from Lily? The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect New England spring day. Richard had spent half the night preparing his townhouse for Lily's first visit. Though he had hired a decorator when he moved in 2 weeks ago, the place still felt impersonal, more like an upscale hotel than a home. In a last-minute attempt to make it more welcoming, he had purchased a children's desk for the guest room, stocked the refrigerator with child-friendly foods, and even bought a small potted sunflower for the kitchen windowsill, a silent tribute to Sarah. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Richard took a deep breath, straightening his casual sweater and jeans, an outfit deliberately chosen to be less intimidating than his usual business attire, and opened the door. Jessica stood there looking even more tired than the day before, but she had made an effort with her appearance, wearing a pretty blouse and neat slacks. Beside her, Lily bounced on her toes with excitement, clutching a small backpack. "Welcome," Richard said, stepping aside to let them enter. Come in, come in." Lily's eyes widened as she took in the townhouse's spacious interior. "Wow, your house is big. Do you live here all by yourself?" Richard nodded, closing the door behind them. "I do, but I've only lived here for 2 weeks. I moved to be closer to you and your aunt." Jessica gave him a surprised look at this revelation, which he hadn't shared with her before. "I made some breakfast if you're hungry," Richard offered, leading them toward the kitchen. "Nothing fancy, just pancakes and fruit." "Pancakes are my favorite," Lily exclaimed, following eagerly. In the kitchen, Lily immediately noticed the sunflower on the windowsill. She approached it reverently, her small fingers gently touching one yellow petal. "My mom loves sunflowers," she said quietly. "That's why my necklace is a sunflower." "I know," Richard replied softly. "I remember." Jessica cleared her throat. "Lily, why don't you wash your hands before breakfast? The bathroom is right down that hallway." Once Lily had left the room, Jessica turned to Richard. "You moved to be closer to us?" Richard nodded, flipping a pancake on the griddle. "It seemed practical, given the circumstances, and after my conversation with my mother, the penthouse felt tainted somehow." "What happened with your mother?" Jessica asked, lowering herself carefully into a kitchen chair. Richard hesitated, then gave her a brief summary of his confrontation with Eleanor, omitting the details about the surveillance photos of Sarah. "She gave me an ultimatum, my old life or Lily. It wasn't a difficult choice." Jessica looked troubled. "I never wanted to come between you and your family." "You didn't," Richard assured her. "My mother did that all by herself 7 years ago when she separated me from Sarah. This is just the culmination of choices made long ago." Lily returned, and they settled into a surprisingly comfortable breakfast. Richard had been nervous about cooking. It wasn't something he did often. But the pancakes turned out well enough, and Lily's enthusiastic appreciation made up for any culinary shortcomings. As they finished eating, Jessica caught Richard's eye and gave a slight nod. It was time. "Lily," Richard began, his heart pounding, "there's something important your aunt and I would like to talk to you about." Lily looked up from her plate, immediately alert to the change in tone. "Is it about Aunt Jessica being sick?" Jessica drew in a sharp breath. "You know about that?" Lily nodded solemnly. "I heard you throwing up, and you sleep a lot now, and sometimes you hold your side like it hurts. Is it very bad?" Jessica reached for Lily's hand across the table. "Yes, sweetheart, it is. I have something called cancer, and the doctors are trying to help me, but—" Her voice faltered. "Are you going to die like Mom did?" Lily asked directly, her voice small but steady. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I might, yes. Not right away, but eventually." Lily absorbed this information with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old, though her lower lip trembled slightly. "Who will take care of me when you go to heaven with Mom?" Jessica squeezed Lily's hand. "That's part of what we want to talk to you about. Remember how I told you that your dad died before you were born?" Lily nodded. "That wasn't exactly true," Jessica continued gently. "Your father didn't know about you. Your mom never told him she was going to have a baby." Confusion crossed Lily's face. "Why not?" "It's complicated, sweetheart. Your mom and your dad cared for each other very much, but there were obstacles. Your mom's boss, your dad's mother, didn't approve of their relationship. She made your mom leave her job, and by then, your mom didn't feel she could tell your dad about you." Lily frowned, processing this information. "So my dad isn't dead? He's alive somewhere?" Jessica nodded, then looked at Richard. "He's alive, Lily. In fact, he's here right now." Lily's eyes widened as she slowly turned to Richard, comprehension dawning on her young face. "You? You're my dad?" Richard's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes, Lily. I'm your father." Lily stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, in a small voice, she asked, "Did you know about me before, when my mom was alive?" "No," Richard answered honestly. "I only found out 2 weeks ago when I saw you wearing the sunflower pendant. I gave that to your mother many years ago, and when I saw you wearing it, I started to wonder if you might be my daughter." "That's why you wanted to do the DNA test," Jessica added, "to make sure." Lily looked down at her plate, then back up at Richard, her eyes filled with questions. "If my mom hadn't died, would you ever have known about me?" The question pierced Richard's heart. "I don't know," he admitted. "Your mom made a choice to keep you separate from my family, and I understand why she did that. But I wish with all my heart that I had known about you from the beginning." Lily seemed to consider this carefully. Do you want to be my dad now?" "More than anything in the world," Richard answered without hesitation. "Even though you just found out about me? Even though you have a big, important job and a fancy house and probably lots of grown-up things to do?" Richard moved from his chair and knelt beside Lily, careful not to touch her until he was sure she was comfortable with it. "Lily, nothing in my life is more important than you. Not my job, not my house, not anything. When I found out you were my daughter, everything else became secondary." Lily studied his face intently, as if searching for any sign of insincerity. Then, with the directness that children often possess, she asked, "Can I think about it?" "About you being my dad?" Richard nodded, swallowing past the lump in his throat. "Course. You can take all the time you need." Jessica reached over to stroke Lily's hair. "Sweetheart, I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know that your mom would be happy that you and your dad found each other. She always said you were the best thing that ever happened to her." Lily leaned against Jessica's side, seeking comfort in the familiar. "Can we still do our special thing tonight, where we talk to Mom's picture?" "Absolutely," Jessica assured her. "We'll never stop doing that." Lily turned back to Richard. "Did you love my mom?" The question, so simple yet so profound, caught Richard off guard. "Yes," he answered after a moment. "I loved her very much. She was extraordinary, kind and brave and talented. She played the piano," Lily said. "Aunt Jessica says I look like her when I smile." "You do," Richard confirmed. "You have her eyes, too, the way they see right through to the heart of things." A tentative smile flickered across Lily's face. "Do I have anything of yours?" Richard considered this, tilting his head as he studied her. "Your chin, I think, and maybe your curiosity. I was always asking questions when I was your age, driving my tutors crazy." "You had tutors?" Lily asked, momentarily distracted by this glimpse into Richard's childhood. "I did. My parents rarely spent time with me themselves. It was different from how your mom raised you." The conversation continued, cautiously navigating this new territory. Lily asked dozens of questions about Richard's life, about what he knew of her mother, about what would happen next. Richard answered as honestly as he could, always checking with Jessica when he wasn't sure how much to share. The corner cafe bustled with lunchtime patrons, a neutral ground Catherine had selected for their meeting. Richard arrived 10 minutes early, his mind still processing the morning's conversation with Lily. He chose a table in the back, away from the windows where passing acquaintances might spot them. Boston's social circles were already humming with speculation about their sudden separation. No need to provide fodder for further gossip. Catherine entered precisely on time, her composure perfect as always. She wore a tailored navy dress that Richard recognized as one of her favorites for important business meetings. This, he realized, was exactly how she viewed their conversation. A business transaction requiring resolution. "Richard," she greeted him, sliding gracefully into the seat opposite. "Catherine, thank you for reaching out." A waiter appeared to take their orders, tea for Catherine, black coffee for Richard. Neither ordered food, suggesting this wouldn't be a lengthy conversation. "I've had time to think," Catherine began once they were alone, "about your situation, about us." Richard nodded, waiting for her to continue. "My first reaction was anger," she admitted. "Anger that you hadn't told me earlier, anger at the timing, anger at the complication. But once I moved past that, I realized we needed to discuss how to proceed." "Proceed?" Richard asked, surprised by her businesslike approach. Catherine's perfectly manicured hands clasped together on the table. "We have 4 months until the wedding. 300 guests have received save-the-date cards. The Four Seasons has been booked, deposits paid to a dozen vendors. From a purely logistical standpoint, canceling would be problematic." Richard stared at her, caught off guard by this pragmatic assessment. "Catherine, I have a 7-year-old daughter I'm just getting to know. Her aunt is dying of cancer. The logistics of our wedding aren't exactly my priority right now." A flicker of annoyance crossed Catherine's face before she regained control. "I understand that. But we need to make decisions, Richard, decisions about our future." The waiter returned with their beverages, providing a brief respite from the tension. Richard stirred his coffee needlessly, gathering his thoughts. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked finally. Catherine took a measured sip of her tea. "I'm proposing that we proceed with the wedding as planned. Your daughter can be incorporated into our lives. Many families successfully navigate blended situations. With the right nannies, the right schools, the right therapists if necessary. Stop, Richard interrupted, unable to listen further. Catherine, this isn't about finding the right staff to manage an inconvenience. This is about my child. A child who has already lost her mother and is about to lose the only other parent figure she's known. I'm trying to be practical, Catherine countered, her voice tightening. Children need stability. We can provide that together as a family. Richard studied the woman he had planned to marry. Catherine Williams was intelligent, accomplished, and in many ways kind, but in this moment he saw clearly what he had perhaps always known, that her vision of family was fundamentally different from what he now wanted. "I don't think that would work," he said gently. "Not in the way Lily needs." Catherine's expression cooled. "Because I'm not the maternal type? Not everyone is born to be a doting mother figure, Richard, but that doesn't mean I can't be a positive influence in her life." "It's not that," Richard assured her, though privately he did question how Catherine, with her structured appearance-focused approach to life, would connect with a sensitive child like Lily. "It's that my priorities have shifted dramatically. I've left Montgomery Industries. I've essentially been cut off by my mother. The life we planned together, the social engagements, the business functions, the political connections through your father, that's not the life I want anymore. And it wouldn't be fair to ask you to give that up." Catherine fell silent, absorbing his words. For a brief moment, something like hurt flickered in her eyes before being replaced by cool assessment. "So you've made your decision," she stated finally. "I think we both have," Richard replied. "You want the life we planned. I want something else now." Catherine unclaped her hands and reached for her purse. "Then I suppose there's nothing more to discuss." She withdrew a small velvet box and placed it on the table between them. Her engagement ring, returned formally rather than left on his coffee table in anger. "Catherine," Richard began, wanting to soften the finality of the moment. "Please," she interrupted, raising a hand, "let's not pretend this is something other than what it is. You've chosen a different path. I respect that, even if I don't understand it." She rose with characteristic grace. "I'll have my assistant coordinate with yours regarding the cancellations." Richard stood as well. "I'll cover all the costs and penalties, of course." "Of course," Catherine echoed, a hint of bitterness finally breaking through her composure. "Goodbye, Richard." As she walked away, her posture perfect as always, Richard felt a curious mixture of relief and sadness. The woman leaving the cafe was someone he had genuinely cared for, someone whose companionship he had valued. But watching her go, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. Jessica's apartment felt stifling despite the open windows. The early summer heat had settled over Boston, making the small space uncomfortably warm. Or perhaps it was just her illness making everything feel worse, Jessica thought, as she sorted through another box of Sarah's belongings. She had been putting this task off for 3 years, unable to face going through her sister's things properly. But now, with her own time running short, Jessica knew she needed to organize what remained of Sarah's life. Photographs, documents, mementos that Lily would want someday. Lily herself was at a neighbor's apartment playing with her daughter. Jessica had wanted privacy for this task, knowing how emotional it might become. The box before her contained Sarah's personal papers, birth certificate, high school diploma, the few letters she had kept over the years. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, Jessica found a journal she had never seen before. The cover was worn leather, the pages slightly yellowed at the edges. With trembling fingers, she opened it to the first entry, dated 6 months after Sarah had been dismissed from the Montgomery household. "I felt the baby move today, a tiny flutter, like butterfly wings. I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I wonder if it will have Richard's eyes or mine. I wonder if I should tell him." Dad always said the Montgomerys destroyed everything they touched. When they fired him after 30 years of service, when he died broken and penniless 6 months later, I believed him. I went to work in that house ready to hate them all, but Richard was different, kind, genuine. The way he looked at me, really looked at me, made me believe that perhaps the Montgomery curse hadn't touched him, but in the end he chose his family over me. When his mother discovered us, he didn't fight for me. He let me be dismissed without a word. How can I trust him with our child? Yet sometimes I think he deserves to know this baby is his legacy too, not just mine. Jessica wiped away tears as she continued reading. The journal documented Sarah's pregnancy, her struggle to support herself, her joy when Lily was born, the most perfect thing I've ever seen, with her father's dimple when she smiles. Later entries revealed Sarah's ongoing internal debate about contacting Richard, particularly as Lily grew older and began asking questions about her father. Lily asked about her dad again today. I told her he was kind and smart, that he would have loved her very much if he'd known her. But, am I being fair? Richard might have changed. 7 years is a long time. Perhaps now he would be strong enough to stand up to Eleanor. But every time I consider reaching out, I remember Dad's warnings about that family. I won't risk Lily being treated the way they treated us. Better she grow up without a father than with one who might reject her, or worse, who might try to take her from me. The final entries, written when Sarah was already sick, broke Jessica's heart. The doctors say it's advanced. Not much time left. Jessica will take care of Lily. I know that with absolute certainty. But I keep thinking about Richard, about Lily growing up without either of her parents. I've written him a letter explaining everything, but I haven't sent it. I can't decide if it would be a kindness or a cruelty to tell him now, when I'm already gone. To burden him with a child he never knew, or to deny him the daughter who carries his blood. Perhaps I'll leave the letter with Jessica, let her decide when or if to send it after I'm gone. The sunflower pendant Richard gave me, I've given it to Lily. She loves it because it was mine, but someday she may understand what it truly means. A connection to the father she's never known. Jessica closed the journal, overwhelmed with emotion. Sarah had been so conflicted, so torn between protecting Lily and acknowledging Richard's rights as a father, and now, by some twist of fate, Lily had found her way to Richard anyway, the sunflower pendant serving exactly the purpose Sarah had perhaps secretly hoped it might. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Wiping her eyes, Jessica rose carefully, wincing at the pain that had become her constant companion, and made her way to the door. Richard stood in the hallway, his expression concerned. "Jessica, I hope I'm not intruding. I called, but there was no answer, and I wanted to check on you." Jessica stepped back to let him in, suddenly grateful for the company. "Lily's at a friend's apartment. I was just going through some of Sarah's things." Richard's gaze fell to the journal still clutched in her hand. "May I?" he asked gently. Jessica hesitated, then nodded, handing him the leather-bound book. "I just found it. It's Sarah's journal from when she was pregnant with Lily, and after—" Richard sat on the worn sofa, handling the journal with reverence. "Are you sure you want me to read this? It seems very personal." "I think she would want you to know what she was thinking," Jessica replied, lowering herself carefully into the armchair opposite. "She was so conflicted about whether to tell you about Lily." As Richard read in silence, Jessica watched his expressions shift. Surprise, pain, regret, and finally a kind of bittersweet understanding. When he reached the end, he closed the journal gently and sat for a long moment, processing what he had read. "She never stopped caring for you," Jessica said quietly, "but she was afraid you would reject Lily or try to take her away." "I wouldn't have," Richard said, his voice rough with emotion. "But she had no way of knowing that. I failed her when it mattered most." "You were young," Jessica reminded him. You were under your mother's influence. Sarah understood that, even if she couldn't fully forgive it. Richard looked up, meeting Jessica's gaze directly. Thank you for sharing this with me. It helps me understand so much. Jessica nodded, then grimaced as a wave of pain washed over her. She reached for the prescription bottle on the side table with shaking hands. Richard was immediately on his feet, fetching her a glass of water to take with the medication. Jessica, you need more help than you're getting. Let me hire a nurse, at least part-time. I'm fine, she insisted automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. Please, Richard pressed. Not for your sake, but for Lily's. She needs to spend time with you without worrying about taking care of you, and it would give you more energy for the time you have with her. Put that way, Jessica found it hard to refuse. All right, she conceded. But someone kind. Someone who won't make Lily uncomfortable in her own home. I'll handle it personally, Richard promised. And Jessica, I know we've been taking things slowly with Lily, but given your condition, I think we need to discuss legal arrangements. I've consulted with a family lawyer about establishing formal paternity and eventual custody. Jessica closed her eyes briefly, the reality of her limited time hitting her anew. Yes, I suppose we should. I want to be clear, Richard continued gently. I have no intention of disrupting Lily's life while you're still able to care for her. But I want to ensure a smooth transition when the time comes. I understand, Jessica whispered. And I'm grateful, Richard, truly. Knowing Lily will be with someone who loves her, it's the only thing that makes this bearable. They spent the next hour discussing practical matters. Legal documentation, Jessica's medical care, how to prepare Lily for the inevitable changes ahead. Though the conversation was painful, Jessica felt a weight lifting. For 3 months she had carried the burden of her diagnosis alone, terrified of what would happen to Lily. Now at least that fear was eased. As Richard prepared to leave, promising to return the next day with information about private nurses, Jessica handed him an envelope she had found among Sarah's things. This is for you, she said quietly. Sarah wrote it before she died but never sent it. I think you should have it now. Richard accepted the envelope, Sarah's neat handwriting addressing it simply to Richard Montgomery. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. After he left, Jessica returned to sorting through Sarah's belongings, her heart lighter despite the pain that medication couldn't fully touch. She had promised her sister she would protect Lily, and now, in an unexpected way, she had fulfilled that promise. Lily would have a father who clearly adored her, who would give her the stability and love she deserved. It wasn't how any of them had imagined their lives unfolding, but perhaps Sarah had known better than she realized when she gave Lily the sunflower pendant, a symbol of always turning toward the light, even in the darkest times. James Montgomery's corner office at Montgomery Industries offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, a vista he had coveted for years. Until Richard's recent abdication of his position, this office had been reserved for his younger brother's eventual ascension to company leadership. Now it was James's domain, a physical manifestation of his improved standing within the family business. He leaned back in his leather chair, reviewing the reports on his desk with satisfaction. In the 3 weeks since Richard had essentially removed himself from the company, James had moved quickly to consolidate power. The board members who had once looked to Richard now turned to him, and even Eleanor had begun including him in decisions she would previously have reserved for her younger son. A knock at the door interrupted his contemplation. "Come in," he called. His executive assistant entered, carrying a slim folder. "The information you requested, Mr. Montgomery." James accepted the folder with a nod of dismissal. Once alone, he opened it to review the contents. The latest report from the private investigator he had hired to monitor Richard's activities. The report detailed Richard's recent meetings with Jessica Anderson, his outings with Lily, His conversation with Catherine Williams that had apparently finalized the end of their engagement. It noted Richard's consultations with a family lawyer specializing in paternity and custody cases, and his interviews with private nursing agencies. Most interesting to James was the information about Jessica Anderson's deteriorating health. According to the investigator who had somehow accessed her medical records, her condition was worsening more rapidly than initially projected. The oncologist now estimated she had perhaps 2 months remaining, rather than the 3 previously suggested. James closed the folder, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on its surface. 2 months. That meant Richard would likely assume custody of Lily by late summer, becoming a full-time single father, just as James was cementing his position at Montgomery Industries. The timing couldn't be more perfect. James picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Mother," he greeted when Eleanor answered. "I have some information about Richard's situation that I think you should be aware of. Could we meet for dinner tonight?" Eleanor agreed, and James hung up with a small smile of satisfaction. His mother had been devastated by Richard's defection, interpreting it as a personal betrayal rather than a simple case of shifted priorities. Her anger made her vulnerable, and a vulnerable Eleanor Montgomery was a rare opportunity indeed. That evening, over dinner at Eleanor's Beacon Hill mansion, James shared what he had learned about Jessica's condition, carefully framing it in terms designed to provoke his mother's anxiety. "So you see," he concluded, "Richard will have full custody of the child within months. He's already hired lawyers to establish paternity officially." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "He truly intends to acknowledge her publicly, then?" "Apparently so," James confirmed. "And once he does, there's nothing to stop him from adding her to the Montgomery family trust. She would have a claim equal to any future grandchildren you might have." He didn't need to specify that he meant his own potential children. James had never married, showing little interest in family life. Eleanor had long ago resigned herself to Richard being her only chance for grandchildren, a hope that the Catherine Williams match had been intended to fulfill. "This cannot be allowed to happen," Eleanor stated flatly. "That child is not a Montgomery. Sarah Anderson manipulated my son, and now her offspring will benefit from her deception." James nodded sympathetically. "It's troubling, certainly, especially given what we know about Sarah's initial intentions in seeking employment here." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What exactly do you mean?" "Just that her timing was suspicious," James replied smoothly. "Taking a position in our household shortly after her father was dismissed, befriending Richard almost immediately, it suggests a certain calculation." He neglected to mention his own prior interest in Sarah, his jealousy when she had chosen Richard instead. Some secrets were best kept buried. "What do you suggest we do?" Eleanor asked, her voice hard. James affected a thoughtful expression. "Richard is vulnerable right now, emotionally invested in this child, isolated from his usual support systems. Perhaps it's time to extend an olive branch. Invite him to bring the girl to meet you. Express a desire to know your granddaughter." Eleanor looked skeptical. "You think I should pretend to accept this situation?" "For now," James clarified. "Richard needs to believe you've softened your position. Once he allows you into the child's life, you'll have more influence over how this plays out." Eleanor considered this strategy, absently touching the pearls at her throat, a nervous habit James recognized from childhood confrontations. "You may be right," she conceded finally. "Richard has always been susceptible to gestures of reconciliation." "Precisely," James agreed. "And in the meantime, I can continue gathering information about Sarah Anderson and her daughter. There may yet be something that would give us leverage in this situation." As the dinner concluded, James felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. Eleanor would follow his suggestion. Her desire to maintain control over the Montgomery legacy would overcome her pride. Once she had inserted herself into Richard and Lily's lives, James would implement the next phase of his plan. Sarah's letter trembled in Richard's hands as he sat alone in his study, the hour approaching midnight. He had carried the envelope with him all day, both desperate to read its contents and terrified of what it might contain. Now, with a glass of whiskey at his elbow for fortification, he carefully broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Sarah's elegant handwriting filled 3 pages, dated just weeks before her death. Dear Richard, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and Jessica has decided you should know the truth. I've struggled with whether to write this letter at all, whether to burden you with knowledge that can only bring pain when it's too late to change anything. But in these final days, I find myself thinking of you, wondering what might have been if circumstances had been different. We have a daughter. Her name is Lily, and she is 7 years old as I write this. She has your chin and your curious mind, but my eyes, and thankfully my musical ability, rather than your self-proclaimed tin ear. She is the light of my life, the greatest joy I have ever known. I never told you I was pregnant when I left the Montgomery household. At first it was shock and hurt that kept me silent, the pain of realizing you wouldn't stand up to your mother for me. Later it was fear that your family would try to take my child, or worse, reject her as they had rejected me. In time, it became easier to let you believe I had simply disappeared, to build a life for Lily and myself apart from the Montgomery world. I don't write this to place blame. We were both young, both caught in circumstances neither of us fully controlled. I've made peace with our past, and I hope that wherever you are now, you've found happiness. I'm leaving Lily my sunflower pendant, the one you gave me that summer beneath the oak tree. Perhaps someday it will find its way back to you, and with it knowledge of our daughter. If that happens, if you're reading this, then you've met Lily, and you know what an extraordinary child she is. My request is simple. Love her, protect her, but also respect what Jessica and I have taught her about kindness, about the value of all people regardless of their wealth or status, about finding joy in small things. Don't try to make her a Montgomery in the way your mother would define it. Let her be herself. I forgave you long ago for what happened between us. I hope someday you can forgive me for keeping Lily from you. With enduring affection, Sarah. P.S. About your mother. There are things about Eleanor Montgomery you don't know. Secrets I discovered when researching why my father was dismissed so suddenly. Look into the summer of 1975 in Martha's Vineyard. What happened there explains more than you might imagine about why she was so determined to separate us. Richard read the letter 3 times, tears tracking silently down his face. Sarah's words, her forgiveness, her understanding, her gentle admonition about raising Lily pierced him deeply. But it was the postscript that left him bewildered. What could possibly have happened in Martha's Vineyard nearly 50 years ago that would explain his mother's actions? Setting the letter aside, Richard moved to his computer, hesitating only briefly before searching for information about Martha's Vineyard in 1975. Nothing immediately relevant appeared, just general historical information about the island, references to notable summer residents of that era. He tried refining his search, adding Eleanor Montgomery to the terms. Still nothing significant. It had been nearly half a century after all. Whatever Sarah had discovered likely hadn't been through a simple internet search. Richard leaned back in his chair, contemplating his next steps. The mystery would have to wait. For now, the substance of Sarah's letter, her wishes for Lily's upbringing, was far more important than decades-old secrets. He returned to the letter, reading it once more, committing Sarah's words to memory. "I won't let you down this time," he whispered to her absent spirit. "I promise." His phone chimed with a text message, startling him from his reverie. It was from Jessica. Lily asked if you could come to our storytelling time tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. It's when we talk to Sarah's picture. Richard's heart leapt at the invitation. The first time Lily had specifically requested his presence for this intimate family ritual. "I'd be honored," he replied immediately. "I'll be there." As he prepared for bed, Richard's mind continued to circle around the mysterious postscript. What had Sarah discovered about his mother? And how had she found it while working as a housekeeper? The questions nagged at him, but they would have to wait. Tomorrow he would join Lily and Jessica in honoring Sarah's memory. That, for now, was all that mattered. The next evening, Richard arrived at Jessica and Lily's apartment precisely at 7:25 p.m., bearing a small potted sunflower similar to the one in his kitchen. Lily opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of the plant. "Is that for our story time?" she asked. Richard nodded. "I thought your mom might like it." Lily guided him inside to where Jessica sat on the worn sofa, looking more frail than she had just days before. A framed photograph of Sarah stood on the coffee table, alongside a single candle waiting to be lit. "Welcome to our special time," Jessica said warmly. "Lily, would you like to explain to Richard how this works?" Lily nodded seriously, taking the potted sunflower from Richard and placing it beside the photograph. "Every night before bed, Aunt Jessica and I light a candle and talk to Mom's picture. We tell her about our day and remember stories about her. Sometimes we sing songs she liked." "That sounds lovely," Richard said, taking a seat where Lily indicated. "You can tell Mom things too," Lily informed him. "She listens to everybody." Jessica lit the candle, its gentle flame illuminating Sarah's photograph, a casual shot of her laughing in a park, sunlight catching in her hair. Richard recognized it immediately as the Boston Public Garden from one of their secret meetings away from the Montgomery estate. "Who wants to start tonight?" Jessica asked. "I will," Lily volunteered. She leaned toward the photograph, speaking with complete naturalness as if her mother were simply sitting across from her. "Hi, Mom. Today was pretty good. I got an A on my science project about butterflies, and Mrs. Thompson said my drawing was the best in the class. Aunt Jessica had a good day, too. Not too much pain." She continued, recounting her day's events, occasionally glancing at Richard with shy inclusion. When she finished, Jessica took her turn, sharing gentle memories of Sarah as a child, and updating her on small neighborhood news. Then both turned expectantly to Richard. His throat tight with emotion, Richard leaned forward, looking at the woman he had once loved, now smiling at him from across an unbridgeable divide. "Hello, Sarah," he began awkwardly. I got your letter yesterday. Thank you for that, for your forgiveness. I want you to know that I'm going to honor your wishes for Lily. I'm learning how to be a father, the kind of father she deserves." He paused, gathering himself before continuing. "I've been telling Lily about the time you played Mozart on the piano in the servants' quarters, how you taught yourself just by listening to recordings, about how you loved strawberry ice cream but were allergic to chocolate, about how you always stopped to help anyone who needed it, even when you had little yourself." Lily listened with rapt attention, absorbing these new details about her mother like precious gifts. Jessica wiped away quiet tears. "I miss you," Richard concluded simply. "And I promised to take care of our daughter." After a moment of respectful silence, Lily surprised them both by beginning to sing. A sweet, clear rendition of "You Are My Sunshine" that Jessica explained had been Sarah's favorite lullaby for Lily. As they concluded the ritual, Richard felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. This small ceremony, this act of keeping Sarah present in their lives, felt right in a way he couldn't articulate. It wasn't morbid or sad, but celebratory, a way of ensuring that Lily would always know her mother, even as she built a relationship with her father. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Richard and Jessica sat in the kitchen, speaking quietly over cups of tea. "Thank you for including me tonight," Richard said. "It meant more than I can express." Jessica nodded. "It was Lily's idea. She said since you knew her mom, too, you should be part of remembering her." That's That's a big step for her. She's warming to you, Jessica confirmed. The fact that you've respected her pace, that you haven't pushed yourself into her life too quickly, it's helped her trust you. Richard hesitated, then asked, "Did you know about what Sarah mentioned in her letter? Something about my mother and Martha's Vineyard in 1975? Jessica looked surprised. "No, Sarah never mentioned anything specific about that to me. She always said she had her reasons for investigating your family, beyond what happened to our father, but she kept those to herself." "I've been trying to figure out what she meant," Richard admitted. "It seems important somehow." "If Sarah thought it was significant enough to mention in her final letter to you, it probably was," Jessica agreed. "She was very intentional about everything in those last weeks." They fell silent, both contemplating Sarah's mysterious reference. Finally, Jessica changed the subject. "The private nurse you arranged starts tomorrow. Thank you for that. It will give me more quality time with Lily." "Of course. And the lawyer has drawn up the paternity and custody documents we discussed. No rush to review them. Whenever you feel up to it." Jessica nodded gratefully. "Soon. I don't want to leave any loose ends." As Richard prepared to leave, promising to return in 2 days for dinner, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was James. "My brother," he explained to Jessica. "Mind if I take this quickly?" Jessica gestured for him to go ahead while she began tidying the kitchen. "James," Richard answered, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "What is it?" "Just checking in, little brother," James replied, his tone casual. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Mother's been asking about you." Richard doubted that very much. "I'm sure she has." "Actually," James continued, undeterred by Richard's skepticism, "she's had a change of heart. She'd like to meet Lily." Richard stiffened. "Absolutely not." "Now, Richard, don't be hasty. She's reaching out, trying to make amends. Isn't that what you always wanted? For her to accept your choices?" "My daughter isn't a bargaining chip in whatever game Mother is playing," Richard stated firmly. "If she wants to repair our relationship, she can start by apologizing for what she did to Sarah, to both Sarah and her father." James sighed dramatically. "Always the idealist. Look, Richard, whether you like it or not, Lily is a Montgomery. Eventually she'll want to know her grandmother, her extended family. Why not make it easier on everyone and agree to a short meeting? On neutral ground, of course." "No, James, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop pushing this." "At least think about it," James persisted. "Mother isn't getting any younger, and I'd like to meet my niece as well." Richard ended the call with a terse goodbye, troubled by James's sudden interest. His brother had never shown much family feeling before. This newfound concern for connecting with Lily seemed suspect at best. When he returned to the kitchen, Jessica was leaning heavily against the counter, her face pale with pain. "Jessica," Richard moved quickly to her side, "let me help you to the sofa." She didn't protest, allowing him to support her weight as they moved to the living room. Once seated, she fumbled with her medication, hands shaking too much to open the bottle. Richard opened it for her, providing water to wash down the pills. "Is there anything else I can do? Should I call someone?" Jessica shook her head, waiting for the medication to take effect. "It's getting worse," she admitted quietly. "Faster than they predicted." Richard sat beside her, offering silent support until her breathing eased and some color returned to her cheeks. "The nurse will be here tomorrow. She'll know how to manage the pain better than I can." "It's not just the pain," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of not having enough time. With Lily, with everything." Richard understood her fear all too well, the same fear that had haunted him since discovering Lily's existence. Time was the one resource none of them could control or expand. "We'll make the most of whatever time there is," he promised. "And Jessica, I want you to know, I read Sarah's letter. I understand now why she kept Lily from me. I'm not angry. I just want to honor what she asked of me, to raise Lily with the values you and Sarah taught her." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "That's all I've ever wanted. For Lily to be loved, to be safe, to grow up with the best of both worlds, Sarah's compassion and your possibilities." They sat together in shared understanding, two people bound by love for a child who carried both their legacies. Outside, night had fallen over Boston, a gentle summer darkness that promised a new day to come. Eleanor Montgomery's private study was a testament to her precise personality. Every book aligned perfectly on its shelf, every pen and paper positioned at exact right angles on her antique desk. It was here that she received James the following afternoon, her posture rigid in her high-backed chair. "Richard refused," James reported, accepting the sherry his mother offered. "Rather emphatically, I might add." Eleanor's lips thinned in displeasure. As expected, he always was stubborn when emotionally invested. "Quite," James agreed, sipping his drink. "However, I've been considering an alternative approach. Richard has been spending considerable time at the Anderson apartment, several evenings a week, according to my sources. Perhaps instead of bringing the child to us, we might find an opportunity to encounter her in her natural environment, as it were." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting what exactly? That I lurk outside their apartment building on the chance of an introduction?" James smiled thinly. "Nothing so undignified, Mother. But I've learned that Jessica Anderson has engaged a private nurse, arranged by Richard, of course, who begins her duties tomorrow. The agency is very exclusive, very discreet, and very susceptible to financial incentive." Eleanor's expression sharpened with interest. "Go on." "For the right price, the nurse might be persuaded to report on activities within the apartment. She might even facilitate a seemingly accidental meeting, perhaps at a park or restaurant, where Richard takes the child. And you believe this nurse would betray her professional ethics for money?" Eleanor asked, though her tone suggested she found the proposition entirely plausible. James swirled his sherry. "Everyone has a price, Mother. It's simply a matter of discovering what it is. For some, it's money. For others, perhaps a relative in need of specialized medical care that's difficult to access. The agency's background checks on their employees are quite thorough. Such vulnerabilities are easily identified." Eleanor considered this approach, her fingers absently touching the strand of pearls at her throat. "It has potential," she acknowledged, "but I want to be clear, James. My goal is not simply to meet the child. I need to understand what Richard sees in her, why he's thrown away everything for a girl he barely knows." "Of course," James agreed smoothly. "Knowledge is power. Once we understand Richard's attachment, we'll be better positioned to manage the situation." Eleanor studied her elder son with new appreciation. James had always been competent, dependable, qualities that had somehow seemed less impressive than Richard's charisma and vision. But lately, James had revealed a strategic mind she hadn't fully recognized before. "Proceed with your plan," she instructed, "but discreetly. If Richard discovers our involvement, it will only reinforce his resistance." "Leave everything to me," James assured her, finishing his drink. "By this time next month, you'll not only have met your granddaughter, you'll be well on your way to influencing her future." After James departed, Eleanor moved to the window overlooking her formal gardens. The sunflowers in the conservatory remained her private indulgence, but out here, visible to guests and family alike, everything was structured, controlled, perfect, just as the Montgomery legacy had always been. Richard's defection threatened that perfection. His acknowledgment of Sarah Anderson's child introduced an unpredictable element into carefully laid plans. It wasn't simply about Richard choosing the child over his responsibilities. It was about what the child represented. A breach in the fortress Eleanor had spent decades building around her family's name and reputation. If the girl truly was Richard's daughter, and Eleanor had no reason to doubt the DNA results, Then she was a Montgomery by blood. The question now was whether she would become a Montgomery in truth, embracing the responsibilities and standards that came with the name, or remain an Anderson, a perpetual reminder of Richard's rebellion. Eleanor moved to her desk and unlocked the bottom drawer, removing a leather-bound album she rarely reviewed. Inside were photographs from a different era. Eleanor as a young woman, beautiful and ambitious, navigating the complex social waters of Boston's elite. There she was at 20, attending her first major charity gala. At 23, announcing her engagement to William Montgomery, heir to the Montgomery fortune. At 25, holding infant James with practiced grace, her expression more satisfied than maternal. She turned to the section she sought, summer photographs from Martha's Vineyard, 1975. Eleanor in white linen, William Montgomery at her side, both smiling for the camera with the forced brightness that had characterized their marriage. In the background of one image, barely noticeable unless one knew to look, stood a young man in staff uniform. Handsome, dark-haired, his gaze fixed on Eleanor with unmistakable longing. Eleanor closed the album abruptly, returning it to its drawer. Sarah Anderson had somehow discovered this chapter of her past, had perhaps even found the connection between that summer employee and her own father. It was a complication Eleanor hadn't anticipated when she'd had George Williams dismissed years later. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she had separated Richard from Sarah to prevent history from repeating itself, only to have Richard's child surface anyway, a living embodiment of the past she had tried to bury. Eleanor returned to the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkening garden beyond. She had sacrificed her own happiness for the Montgomery legacy once. She had forced Richard to make the same sacrifice with Sarah. Now, with Richard reclaiming the happiness she had denied him, the legacy itself was at risk. Unless, of course, she could find a way to bring Lily Anderson into the fold on her terms, to shape the child into a proper Montgomery despite her unfortunate maternal heritage. It would require patience, subtlety, and a willingness to appear more accepting than she felt. But Eleanor Montgomery had built her life on such calculated performances. She picked up her phone and dialed James. "I've been thinking," she said when he answered. "Perhaps flowers would be appropriate for Jessica Anderson, given her illness. A gesture of sympathy from our family to hers." James's smile was audible in his voice. "An excellent idea, Mother. I'll arrange it immediately." Eleanor ended the call with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Richard's defection. The path forward was becoming clear. Richard believed he had chosen Lily over the Montgomery legacy, but Eleanor would ensure that in the end he and his daughter would serve that legacy whether they wished to or not. Miss Abernathy, the private nurse Richard had engaged, arrived promptly at 8 the next morning. A competent woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, she quickly established herself in the Anderson apartment, organizing medications, reviewing Jessica's care plan, and winning Lily's approval by producing strawberry candies from her pocket. "These are for after your breakfast," she told Lily with a wink. "Can't have your aunt thinking I'm spoiling you right off the bat." By lunchtime, Jessica was resting more comfortably than she had in weeks, the pain managed through a combination of medication adjustments and positioning techniques Miss Abernathy seemed to know instinctively. "You're a miracle worker," Jessica sighed gratefully as the nurse helped her settle on the sofa. "Just experience, dear," Miss Abernathy replied. "Now, shall I make you both some lunch before your visitor arrives?" Jessica looked confused. "Visitor? I'm not expecting anyone." "Oh, the delivery person said it was expected. A rather elaborate flower arrangement that just arrived. Let me fetch it." Ms. Abernathy returned carrying a stunning arrangement of exotic blooms, tastefully designed in a crystal vase that Jessica immediately recognized as far too expensive for their modest apartment. A small envelope was attached. With trembling fingers, Jessica opened the card. The message, printed on heavy cream stationery, embossed with a subtle M, read simply, with deepest sympathy during your illness. Eleanor Montgomery. Who's it from? Lily asked, admiring the colorful blooms. Jessica hesitated, unsure how to explain. It's from Richard's mother, she finally said. It seems she heard that I haven't been feeling well. Lily's brow furrowed. But I thought Richard doesn't talk to his mom anymore. He said she was mean about my mom. That's true, Jessica confirmed carefully. But sometimes people try to make amends when they realize they've been unkind. Lily considered this explanation. Does this mean she wants to meet me? The directness of the question caught Jessica off guard. I don't know, sweetheart. Would you want to meet her? She's your grandmother, after all. Lily shrugged, her expression thoughtful. Maybe, if she's nice now. Richard seems sad about not talking to her sometimes. Miss Abernathy, who had been quietly arranging the flowers on a side table, spoke up. These will need fresh water every few days. Shall I take care of that for you, Miss Anderson? Yes, thank you, Jessica replied, though her attention remained on Lily's surprisingly mature consideration of Eleanor Montgomery's gesture. After lunch, while Lily worked on her summer reading assignment under Ms. Abernathy's supervision, Jessica texted Richard about the flowers. His response came quickly. This is her pattern. Small gestures to gain access, then manipulation. Please be cautious. Jessica shared his wariness, yet she couldn't help wondering if there might be value in Lily having some relationship with her paternal grandmother, especially once Jessica was gone. Eleanor Montgomery might be controlling and elitist, but she was also Lily's blood relative, part of the heritage that rightfully belonged to her. Later that evening, when Richard arrived for dinner, they discussed the flowers while Lily was in the bathroom. It's a classic Eleanor move, Richard explained, his expression troubled. She never apologizes directly, never acknowledges wrongdoing. Instead, she makes these grand gestures that create a sense of obligation in the recipient. I understand your concerns, Jessica said, but Lily asked about meeting her. She seems curious. Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of course she is. It's natural. But my mother, she's not like normal grandmothers, Jessica. She doesn't bake cookies or tell bedtime stories. She evaluates people for their usefulness to her goals. The Boston Public Library's rare manuscript room maintained a hushed reverence, its polished wood tables and green reading lamps creating an atmosphere of scholarly seclusion. Richard arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a seat with a clear view of both entrances. Despite his outward composure, tension coiled through him as he waited for his mysterious correspondent. At precisely 2 o'clock, an elderly man entered, leaning heavily on a cane. His weathered face and stooped posture suggested someone in his 80s, though his eyes remained sharp and alert as they scanned the room. When those eyes landed on Richard, a flicker of recognition passed through them. The man approached slowly, lowering himself into the chair opposite Richard with a soft grunt of discomfort. "You look like your father," he said without preamble, his voice a gravelly whisper appropriate to their surroundings. "Same jawline." Richard studied the stranger, searching for any familiar features. "You knew my father? And your mother? Rather well, as it happens." The man extended a gnarled hand. "Henry Blackwell. I worked at the Montgomery summer house in Martha's Vineyard. 1973 through 1976. Richard shook the offered hand, its papery skin belying a surprisingly firm grip. "You sent the message about 1975? Henry nodded, reaching into his worn leather satchel to extract a manila envelope. "Sarah Anderson found me about 4 years ago. Smart girl, determined. Asked a lot of questions about that particular summer." "Why?" Richard pressed. "What happened in 1975? Henry's weathered face creased in a sad smile. "Your mother happened. Eleanor Spencer, as she was before marrying your father. Beautiful, ambitious, and entirely focused on becoming Mrs. William Montgomery." He slid the envelope across the table. These are copies of what I shared with Sarah. Letters, photographs, documentation of what really happened that summer. I kept them all these years, knowing someday the truth would matter to someone. Richard hesitated before touching the envelope. Why contact me now, after all this time? Because Sarah made me promise that if anything happened to her, if you ever came looking for answers, I would help you understand. Henry leaned forward, his voice dropping further. And because I read about your discovery of your daughter in the society columns. History repeating itself in the most unexpected way. Richard's hand finally closed over the envelope. What will I find in here? The truth about your mother's first pregnancy. The truth about why she hated Sarah Anderson on sight. The truth about why George Williams was really dismissed after 30 years of service. Henry pushed himself to his feet with visible effort. Read it privately, Mr. Montgomery. Some truths are better absorbed in solitude. With that cryptic advice, the elderly man made his slow way to the exit, leaving Richard alone with the envelope and its mysterious contents. Richard waited until he was home, doors locked and phone silenced, before opening Henry Blackwell's envelope. Inside were several faded photographs, handwritten letters, and what appeared to be personnel records from the Montgomery summer estate. The first photograph showed a much younger Eleanor, perhaps 22 or 23, standing on a beach, her hand resting protectively over a visibly pregnant belly. The date stamp on the photo's border read July 1975. Beside her stood a handsome young man in casual clothes, his arm around her shoulders, his dark features strikingly similar to... Richard stared in shock. The man in the photograph could have been George Williams' younger brother. The same distinctive nose, the same set of the eyes. Yet Richard knew Williams had no brothers. The resemblance could only mean one thing. This was George Williams himself, at least 30 years younger than when Richard had known him as the Montgomery family butler. The next photograph showed Eleanor alone, no longer pregnant, her face drawn with what appeared to be grief. This one dated October 1975. Richard turned to the letters. Correspondence between Eleanor and George that told a heartbreaking story. Eleanor engaged to William Montgomery, but secretly in love with George Williams, a summer employee at the Montgomery estate. A pregnancy discovered too late to hide from George, but still early enough to conceal from William, who was traveling in Europe. Frantic plans for an elopement, for abandoning the security of the Montgomery fortune for love. Then tragedy. A stillbirth at 7 months. Eleanor's subsequent decision to proceed with her marriage to William. Her pragmatic choice of security over the uncertainty of life with George. Her insistence that George accept a position as butler in the Montgomery household, where she could keep him close without arousing suspicion. The final letter, dated decades later in 2007, was from Eleanor to George. After 30 years, it seems William has finally grown suspicious. Your resemblance to James is becoming more pronounced as he ages. A cruel trick of genetics I didn't anticipate. It would be best if you retired immediately. I'll ensure a generous severance, of course, but we must not risk William making the connection. James must never know. The scandal would destroy everything we've built. Richard set down the letter, his mind reeling. James, his older brother, born just 10 months after Eleanor and William's wedding. The brother who had never quite resembled their father, whose darker features had always been attributed to some distant Montgomery relative. The truth hit Richard with stunning clarity. James wasn't William Montgomery's son at all. He was George Williams' child, conceived during Eleanor's affair, perhaps even before the stillbirth of their first baby. Eleanor had married William while pregnant with another man's child, passing James off as the Montgomery heir, which meant James was Sarah and Jessica Anderson's half-brother, which meant Lily was not only Richard's daughter, but also James's niece, through both sides of her family tree. The tangled web of relationships explained so much. Eleanor's visceral reaction to Sarah, her desperate need to separate Richard from the girl whose father she had betrayed. It wasn't merely class prejudice, it was fear of exposure. Sarah's presence in the household, her growing closeness to Richard, represented a dangerous connection to the secret Eleanor had buried for decades. And George Williams, fired not for theft, as Eleanor had claimed, but because his resemblance to James threatened to expose the deception. The loyal servant discarded after 30 years to protect Eleanor's carefully constructed facade. Richard gathered the materials with trembling hands, understanding now why Sarah had included that cryptic postscript in her final letter. She had discovered that her father had been dismissed not for any wrongdoing, but to protect Eleanor's darkest secret. She had learned that James, the Montgomery heir, the firstborn son, was actually her half-brother, sharing the same father. Had she confronted Eleanor with this knowledge? Had that been the real reason for her sudden dismissal? It seemed likely, given the timing and Eleanor's panicked reaction. The doorbell rang, startling Richard from his thoughts. He hastily returned the documents to their envelope before answering. Jessica stood on his doorstep, her face drawn with fatigue, but her eyes bright with determination. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Miss Abernathy is with Lily, and I needed to speak with you privately." Richard ushered her inside, concerned by the effort it clearly took for her to make this unexpected visit. "You should have called. I would have come to you." Jessica shook her head, lowering herself carefully onto his sofa. This felt too important for a phone call. "Richard, I've been thinking about Eleanor's flowers, about Lily's curiosity regarding her grandmother. I don't have much time left, and I need to know Lily will be prepared for whatever comes after I'm gone." Richard sat beside her, the envelope of revelations heavy in his hands. "Jessica, there's something you should know first. Something about your father, about my family." He explained what he had discovered, about Eleanor's relationship with George Williams, about James's true parentage, about the web of half-siblings and hidden connections that bound their families together in ways neither had imagined. Jessica listened in stunned silence, her hand unconsciously moving to the sunflower pendant she now wore in Sarah's memory. When Richard finished, she remained quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "So James is our half-brother," she said finally, "and he doesn't know." "I don't believe he does," Richard confirmed, "though it explains his recent interest in Lily. Perhaps on some subconscious level he senses the connection." Jessica's expression hardened. "It doesn't change who my father was or what your mother did to him. He died believing he'd failed somehow, that his decades of service meant nothing." "I know, and I'm sorry." Richard hesitated, then added, "There's something else, a second child before James, a stillbirth." Jessica's eyes widened. "A half-sibling we never knew about." "Yes." Richard placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. "This doesn't excuse what my mother did to your family, but perhaps it helps explain her actions. She's spent decades burying these secrets, constructing a perfect facade. Sarah, and now Lily, threaten that facade simply by existing." Jessica nodded slowly. "This is why you're so wary of Eleanor's sudden interest in Lily." "Exactly. She's not reaching out because she's had a change of heart. She's trying to control a situation that threatens to expose everything." Jessica was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "Richard, regardless of your mother's motives, the fact remains that she is Lily's grandmother. And James, despite everything, is her uncle twice over. When I'm gone, you and they will be her only blood relatives." Richard understood Jessica's concern. "What are you suggesting? That perhaps we should control the introduction, rather than leaving it to chance or manipulation on our terms with clear boundaries." Jessica met his gaze directly. "I need to know Lily will have a family when I'm gone. A complete family, complicated as it may be." Richard considered her words carefully. The thought of allowing his mother access to Lily still filled him with apprehension, but Jessica's reasoning was sound. Better a managed introduction than Eleanor finding some way to insert herself into Lily's life without their oversight. "All right," he agreed finally, "but with conditions. A neutral location, both of us present, a limited time frame." Jessica nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you. I think this is the right decision, despite the complications." As they worked out the details of a potential meeting, Richard couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The secrets he had discovered represented just the visible portion of a much larger iceberg of family dysfunction and deception. Navigating these waters would require extraordinary care, especially with Lily's well-being at stake. After Jessica left, promising to discuss the proposed meeting with Lily first, Richard returned to the envelope of documents. There was one photograph he hadn't examined closely, a group shot of the Martha's Vineyard staff from summer 1975. In it, George Williams stood proudly in his uniform, a younger Henry Blackwell beside him, and partially visible at the edge, a woman Richard didn't recognize, her face turned slightly away from the camera. On the back, in faded pen, "Martha's Vineyard staff, summer 1975. George Williams, Henry Blackwell, Margaret Spencer." Spencer, Eleanor's maiden name. Richard studied the partially visible woman more carefully. Though the quality of the old photograph made details difficult to discern, there was something familiar in the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw. The private dining room at the Four Seasons Hotel offered both elegance and discretion, a neutral territory where neither the Montgomerys nor the Andersons would have the home field advantage. Richard had arranged everything meticulously: a Saturday lunch, a menu approved by both Jessica and Lily, firm time limits, and clear expectations communicated to Eleanor beforehand. No manipulative behavior, no attempts to undermine Richard's relationship with Lily, no mentions of Sarah that weren't positive and respectful. Any violation of these terms would end the meeting. Eleanor had agreed to everything with surprising acquiescence, arousing Richard's suspicions further. His mother never surrendered control so easily unless she had an alternative strategy in mind. Richard arrived early with Lily, who wore a simple blue dress and her treasured sunflower pendant. Jessica had wanted to attend, but had awakened that morning too weak to manage the outing. Miss Abernathy remained with her, promising to call immediately if her condition changed. "Are you nervous?" Richard asked Lily gently as they waited in the private room. Lily nodded, her small fingers fidgeting with the pendant. "A little." "You said she didn't like my mom." Richard chose his words carefully. "Your grandmother and I have different views on many things, but she's agreed to meet you because you're important to me, and ultimately you're important to her too, as her granddaughter." "Will she like me?" Lily asked, the question piercing in its innocence. Richard knelt to her level, meeting her eyes directly. "Lily, anyone who truly gets to know you will love you. You're extraordinary. But even if, for some reason, she doesn't show that she appreciates how special you are, that reflects on her, not on you. Understand?" Lily nodded solemnly, then tensed as the door opened. Eleanor Montgomery entered the room with regal bearing, elegant as always in a tailored cream suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. For a moment she stood motionless, her eyes fixed on Lily with an intensity that made Richard instinctively move closer to his daughter. "Mother," he greeted formally, "thank you for coming. This is Lily. Lily, this is your grandmother, Mrs. Montgomery." Eleanor approached slowly, her expression unreadable as she studied the child before her. "Hello, Lily," she said, her voice softer than Richard had heard it in years. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Lily, ever polite, extended her small hand. "Hello, Mrs. Montgomery. Thank you for the flowers you sent Aunt Jessica. They were very pretty." Eleanor seemed momentarily taken aback by this direct acknowledgment of her gesture, but quickly recovered, taking Lily's offered hand. "You're welcome, my dear. I was sorry to hear of your aunt's illness." They settled at the table, an uncomfortable silence descending until their server arrived with appetizers, fresh fruit for Lily, small gourmet salads for the adults. Richard watched closely as his mother attempted to engage Lily in conversation, her questions appropriate if somewhat stiff. What did Lily enjoy in school? What books did she like to read? Did she have favorite activities? Lily answered each query politely but briefly, her natural reserve evident. Richard noticed her unconsciously touching the sunflower pendant whenever Eleanor's gaze became too intense, as though drawing strength from the connection to Sarah. "He informed me that he had shared certain historical documents with you regarding Martha's Vineyard." "Yes, he did," Richard confirmed, studying his mother's face for any sign of her true emotions. "Were you planning to tell me yourself about James, about my brother's true parentage?" Eleanor's hand moved to her pearls, that telling nervous gesture Richard had observed throughout his childhood. "It was complicated, Richard. William and I were engaged. I made a mistake with George. When I lost our first child, I thought it was over between us. But then you discovered you were pregnant again with James," Richard finished for her, "and you passed him off as William's son." "I did what was necessary," Eleanor said, her voice hardening slightly, "for the family, for the Montgomery name. And 30 years later you fired George without warning or reference because his resemblance to James threatened your secret." Richard couldn't keep the anger from his voice. "He died in poverty, Mother. Sarah and Jessica's father died believing he had somehow failed after 3 decades of loyal service." Eleanor had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. "I provided a severance package if he squandered it." "He was ill," Richard interrupted. "He needed health care, support, things your severance package couldn't cover for long." Eleanor's gaze drifted to Lily, still happily engaged with her dessert. "Is that why Sarah came to work for us? To investigate her father's dismissal?" "Yes, and when she discovered the truth, or at least part of it, you had her removed too, just like George, just like anyone who threatens the perfect Montgomery image." Eleanor's eyes flashed with a glimpse of her usual steel. "I protected this family for decades, Richard. Everything I've done has been to preserve what generations built before us." "At what cost?" Richard demanded, keeping his voice low despite his anger. "Look at her, Mother. Look at Lily. She's innocent in all this, yet you were willing to hire private investigators to keep me from acknowledging her. Where does it end? How many lives are you willing to sacrifice for the almighty Montgomery name?" Eleanor fell silent, her gaze once again drawn to Lily. After a long moment she spoke in a voice Richard barely recognized. Softer, almost vulnerable. "She looks like Margaret sometimes. Something in her expression." Richard seized on the reference. "Margaret Spencer. I saw her in a photograph from Martha's Vineyard. Who was she, Mother?" Eleanor's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Henry showed you Margaret's photograph? I wouldn't have expected him to have one." "Who was she?" Richard repeated. Eleanor hesitated, then answered with obvious reluctance. "My twin sister." The revelation struck Richard speechless. A twin sister? In all his 35 years he had never heard his mother mention having a sibling, let alone an identical twin. "What happened to her?" he finally managed to ask. "She died the winter after that summer in Martha's Vineyard." Eleanor's voice was flat, emotionless, yet Richard detected a deep pain beneath the surface. "We don't speak of her." Before Richard could press for more details, Lily's voice interrupted them. "I'm finished with my dessert. Can we go now?" Richard turned to find his daughter standing nearby, her dessert bowl empty, her expression a mixture of politeness and clear desire to end the visit. He checked his watch. They had reached the agreed-upon time limit. "Yes, sweetheart, we can go," he assured her. To Eleanor he added, "Thank you for meeting with us, Mother. I'll be in touch about any future visits." Eleanor nodded, then surprised both Richard and Lily by kneeling to the child's level, a gesture Richard had never seen his aristocratic mother make before. "It was lovely to meet you, Lily. I hope we'll see each other again soon." Lily regarded her grandmother with that direct, assessing gaze she had inherited from Sarah. "Thank you for lunch," she said simply, neither accepting nor rejecting the implied invitation for future contact. As they left the Four Seasons, Richard waited until they were in the car before asking, "What did you think of your grandmother?" Lily considered the question with her usual thoughtfulness. "She seems sad," she concluded finally, "like she's carrying something heavy inside that makes her not smile properly." Richard glanced at his daughter in the rear-view mirror, struck once again by her perceptiveness. "That's very insightful, Lily. Can we go see Aunt Jessica now?" she asked, changing the subject with the natural resilience of childhood. "I want to tell her about the chocolate mousse. It had gold sprinkles on top." Richard smiled, grateful for Lily's uncomplicated priorities. "Of course. Aunt Jessica will want to hear all about it." As they drove toward Jessica's apartment, Richard's mind churned with the new information. His mother's twin sister, dead for nearly 50 years, yet never mentioned in family histories. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle that might explain Eleanor's pathological need for control, for perfection, for the unblemished Montgomery legacy. Whatever had happened to Margaret Spencer that long-ago winter after Martha's Vineyard, Richard sensed it was central to understanding his mother and to protecting Lily from the dysfunctional family dynamics that had already claimed too many victims. Nevertheless, something had shifted today. In those brief moments, when Eleanor had looked at Lily and seen echoes of her long-dead sister, Richard had glimpsed a vulnerability he had never believed his mother capable of feeling. Perhaps there was hope, after all, for healing the wounds that had festered for generations in both the Montgomery and Anderson families. Perhaps Lily, with her extraordinary capacity for seeing through pretense to the heart of things, would be the catalyst for that healing. Or perhaps Eleanor's ghost would prove too powerful to exorcise, her secrets too deeply buried to unearth without destroying what remained of their fractured family. Only time would tell, and time, as Jessica's deteriorating condition painfully reminded them, was the one resource none of them could afford to waste. In the sunflower pendant that connects past to present, you'll find echoes of your own life's journey, the roads not taken, the secrets kept to protect those you love, and the unexpected ways family finds its way back together. Like Eleanor, many of us carry the weight of choices made decades ago, decisions that seemed right at the time, but left scars we still touch in quiet moments. Like Richard, you may have missed precious years with someone who matters, years that no wealth or power can reclaim. And like Jessica, you understand that true love sometimes means letting go, entrusting your heart's treasure to another's care. This story reminds us that it's never too late to heal old wounds, to extend a hand across the divide of hurt and misunderstanding. The legacy we leave isn't found in family names or fortunes, but in the courage to face our truths, to forgive ourselves and others for being imperfectly human. As you stand at this crossroads of life, with wisdom earned through your own summers in Martha's Vineyard and winters of reckoning, remember that even the most carefully buried secrets yearn for light, like sunflowers eternally turning toward the sun. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.